to another episode of Mental Health Monday, sponsored by the Greater Calvary Full Gospel Baptist Church. Uh, our objective is to deliver biblically based, relevant content to help maintain good mental health. Today's topic is coping with change, and my special guest is Sister Regina House and Dr. Adrian Dixon. Sister Regina is a mother, a wife, and a essential worker, a case manager, and she'll be able to tell you more about what she does in working with our elderly population. So, Sister House and Dr. Dixon, will you both take a few moments to greet the people watching on social media?
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be back. This has been a wonderful forum, and this topic is such a needed topic to talk about. Our response to working with the most wise and the most important heroes of our lives, and those are our parents and grandparents and those around us who are seasoned in this life. So, thank you so much for allowing me to join in on the conversation.
I'd like to say good evening, everyone, and thank you. I just also want to say that working with seniors, I'm a aging caseworker for GCAC, so this is something I do daily, and I don't take it lightly. So I do want to say thank you guys for allowing me to join.
Again, we thank you for joining us this evening. I want to jump right into the conversation. And Sister House, I have a question here for you. Some baby boomers born between the years of 1944 and 1964 are not very fond of technology or social media, so their social interaction may be limited. How do we keep them connected during this time of social distancing and quarantine?
Um, well, I think we need to, encourage change, first of all. And then we need to rely on family and maybe their caregivers, that they have a designated caregiver or if they have a care staff, and let them know that, cell phones and tablets, how easy they are to navigate. If I can give an example, I have a consumer who this time last year, she hated her cell phone. It was just difficult. But now the other day she told me that she knows how to FaceTime. And so her and her daughter who lives in Georgia, they actually have breakfast every morning.
That is good because I can speak from a personal standpoint. I have grandmothers who don't even like to text, let alone social media. If I go too much time without going by the house, they like that face to face contact, if you know what I mean. And so
Yes.
that's good that some of those people are learning how to communicate and how to stay relevant. What are some activities that can be done while following the rules and regulations of social distancing?
Um, I guess some of the activities can be done if they are tech savvy. There's games and iPhones, games that they can download on their phones and apps. If they have family, I say anything to stimulate. Let's keep them stimulated. Yes. How about bingo and checkers? If they live alone, we want to encourage adult coloring, arts and crafts, crocheting, read the Bible, of course, crossword puzzles, word searches, anything I think just to keep them engaged.
Right, and I think it's important for us to emphasize that social distancing does not mean social isolation. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's
Well,
important for us to keep that community that we're used to around, even if we can't
and
physically touch them.
I do say, though, since we're kind of in that yellow phase, that even who's ever designated to check on them, because everybody should be checking on our seniors. Somebody should be checking on them daily. I think that even if a neighbor, knock on the door, that way those who like that face-to-face, just knock on their door, stand outside their screen, and just hold a conversation so that they don't feel like they're alone right now.
That's a great comment, Regina. I know I was talking to a colleague of mine that lives in Florida, and she was saying in their community, what they ended up doing was designing. She had her kids make signs, and the elderly that lived in their neighborhood, they took them there, and the elderly could post the sign in the window on the door. Just kind of like a yellow or green, I'm good. Yellow, I might need some extra help, or I'm not feeling well today. Just so people knew to contact maybe their family members. They had lists of contacts of their neighbors to be able to get a hold of them. So I just think that sense of community is so important about checking
Yes.
on them and engaging them. Yeah.
Right. It is extremely important. I always say no man is an island unto themselves, and so keeping a positive community is definitely essential, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
It is very important. Um, On to my next question. As it relates to your respective professions as a case manager and a psychologist, since the outbreak of COVID-19 in our area, are people utilizing the various services available to them?
I have seen our numbers increase, especially with example, Meals on Wheels or home delivered meals.
Dr. Dixon?
I think, yeah, I definitely have seen with the expansion of being able to do telehealth and teletypes of interventions, you see services increasing. And I think that's really important moving forward. It would be interesting to see how the state and our regulatory bodies look at how we can access not just our seniors, but others in the community using technology. Because, when there are just limitations in general from transportation, just physical limitations, having this platform in a virtual way has really increased, I think, consumers' opportunities to engage with medical practitioners and other types of social service networks. So, I mean, I know from my end, I don't necessarily work with seniors daily, but working with families and other support systems and those other systems of care, we have definitely seen an increase of the accessibility of services as well as utilization of services.
Yes,
That, that,
I agree as
that's
well.
good. Go ahead, Sister House.
Oh, I was just going to agree. I mean, I guess I work in a building, one of the buildings downtown as their case manager, and I have, as far as just making sure that services are accessible, like with the lift, making sure that they can contact their doctor and making sure that they have access to like their care staff and making sure that their medications are being set up. So I do agree with Dr. Dixon.
I
Right.
also think it's interesting too, because when we're looking at this particular population, it can, we can conceptualize it or see it as a vulnerable population. So making
Yeah.
sure that they definitely have access to those support services to do their follow-up care or be able to look at any kind of specialized care or services that's needed, particularly, as we age, we may find ourselves having, more need of medical as well as social service resources. And so I think that's important to make sure that they know what their options are and that we're supporting them to be able to, have regular access.
That's good information. Now, if there are some seniors or some family members watching and they don't know of services, Sister House, are there any services or any resources that we can supply people with? Or if they're in need of services, who can they contact?
Well, as I said, I work for GCAT, and our number is 459-4581. And there are caseworkers who are currently working remotely. However, calling that number, leaving a message, someone will call you back. And then also, there's a guide for service that Independent Council on Aging puts out once a year, I believe. And it's it has tons of information from emergency services to special needs to mental health, apartments, supports. And then also, I believe you can dial 211, and then that should be able, they should be able to help you access services as well.
Thank you, because I think a lot of times people don't always know that there are services available, and when you don't know, you can't utilize them.
Correct.
So, what are some lessons you both have learned either professionally or personally from this whole COVID-19? What is this teaching us as individuals, and for you two as essential uh, workers? What are we seeing?
I would say adapting to change. It's just not seniors that have to adapt. I think COVID has taught us that we have to be able to just adapt to the environment because this may be our new normal.
Yeah, I think the adaptability, flexibility, if you would, during this time as an essential worker, you start to realize some of the challenges in systems and structures, and even, we already had limitations within our social structures, and sometimes, particularly with African Americans, their accessibility to certain levels of service or type of services. So I do think that even though we have this online virtual platform, there are still some challenges within our systems and systems of care that can sometimes be challenging to navigate. And certainly as we've moved into this new normal and people are working in a different context, that can sometimes be even more challenging. I think just being committed and continuing to, look for those resources and try and connect. So not to get frustrated, because I think in this time, a lot of systems are trying to reconfigure and adjust to this time period and be adaptable to this new system. And so it's easy for sometimes people to be like, forget it, I'm not even going to be bothered. But I think we have to, continue to press forward and not get frustrated and just recognize that everyone is making adjustments, even systems, though they should be ready and ready to make those services available in multiple ways. They still may be struggling in terms of just having the networks and the devices or the equipment to be able to make those accommodations.
Right. Anything you'd like to add, Sister House?
Just as I said, with adapting to change, and I know, Dr. Dixon, you mentioned something about becoming frustrated. I think as when we talk about caregiving for the seniors and for the elderly, that population, if there is a caregiver, I think for me to say to them, it's okay. Don't be afraid to seek help. There's so many support groups, whether like outside agencies or respite care. They're out there, and it's just a matter of navigating. So it's a matter of just seeking help before that frustration becomes burnout, which, with adapting to change.
It's real interesting too. I was just thinking, I saw a clip not too long ago on one of the news stories, and it was really a senior living facility. And they were just talking about, even within the facility itself, that some of the seniors weren't, because of their healthcare conditions and some of the challenges that they have, they weren't really interacting with one another. They still had the social distance, even though they were living within the same structure. Right. And one of the residents started doing a DJ kind of thing. He was DJing for the residents. And so I do think it's so important when we were talking about services that and the access for our seniors, that it's not just formalized services, but it's those informal supports with one another, people within their own age bracket, and connect to them and relate to them based on the things that's happening within their own season of life. And so trying to figure out ways that we can help them stay connected in that way to one another, and that they have those natural support systems that reflect their own worldview kinds of things. So I think that's a critical piece as well.
Right.
Well, I have an example. The building that I work at, this week we are practicing social distancing, of course, but we have bingo. So it's like 2 of the residents per table, and they're just so excited that they can come back together. Even, yes, they have to practice social distancing. Yes, they have to wear their masks. However, they're excited that, okay, we can come back together.
Yeah.
Because they miss that interaction, that social piece.
I know we're talking particularly about elderly, but both of you have children that I grew up with. And even for us as young adults or even adults, this has been challenging. It's been unprecedented, if you will. I think we, even as young people, are having a hard time adapting. I mean, we've been at this now for about 2.5 months, and it's like, when is this going to end? So all of us have that part of anxiety that we just want this to end. What are you hearing from your children?
I talked to, of course, my one daughter lives here, my goddaughter, who I consider as one of my own, but just in terms of our connection, we do social hours. We get together, our virtual social hours. And, we're using Zoom, and I'm still trying to, figure out Facebook. So we talk about it in terms of the elderly, not, but there are many people who may not necessarily be considered the elderly or seniors yet. I know I'm on my way, but I'm still learning to navigate these platforms as well. It's just not the way in which my whole worldview, my context of engaging. And so it really is this new paradigm shift for all of us about how we engage. And so my children, I think, they're much more flexible around these platforms, but it's a struggle. And so I think at times, their natural way of wanting to engage with one another is to connect in the physical context. And they're in the midst of their that era where they want to get out there, and this is the time where culturally, historically, we've talked about, oh, live your life, enjoy time. So they
Right.
looking at doing that in very physical connectivity ways. And so I think that that's been a challenge, but they're figuring out ways on how to navigate that.
Okay. I want to shift gears for a moment, Dr. Dixon, and just kind of, a lot of people, maybe not here in our city, but I don't want to just limit our audience to our city because we know that people from around the country tune in, and maybe they have lost a loved one, not maybe due to COVID-19, but with the rules and regulations, maybe they weren't able to go through the grieving process. Maybe they weren't able to have a funeral. What can we talk about grief for a moment? Because I think we don't talk about that whole process enough.
Yeah, I think that in general, this whole new world view with COVID, and having to have shifted to a virtual platform, but also navigating these health crisis and health concerns have just created some new challenges. And when you look at the issue of loss, particularly, I'll just use my family as an example. We're very um, connected, even extended family system. And so something like a loss or funeral, we get together, we share. It's our way in which we start the healing process, and that we are able to support one another. And I actually had a relative who passed away from COVID in Detroit, and it was the
Mm,
hardest thing to not be
wow.
able to jump in the car and say, we're driving, we're going to the funeral, there's going to be this repast in which we all come together and celebrate. So as a family, we had to figure out a way in which we were able to connect, and how we were able to express that grief and support one another. I do think it is very challenging right now to figure out ways in which we demonstrate that support and that affection and nurturance when there's particularly a loss. In
Right.
general, loss, I think, can be really, really difficult. And in a time like this where we don't have a lot of answers, fear can creep in, and not just about the loss of our loved one or friend, but sometimes that contextually, it means how do we feel about ourselves, that this sense that we're not invincible, and is there fear around this is going to happen to me or what it will look like. I think there's a lot of angst around grief, and at times I think culturally, in particular, people are suffering and struggling with this thing, and they may not feel as open to express that they're really struggling and that they're really grieving and what the impact can be, and that can be just like any other kind of stress, even more so because it's internalized, and so they can have, the consequences of that can have some pretty serious physical consequences for people who are grieving and feeling and not really having an outlet or a reasonable place to express that in a meaningful way and in a productive way.
Right. You talked about expressing grief. I think when I was in school, one of my psychology professors, she emphasized the first way to deal with grief is to acknowledge it, instead of to bottle it up and to deal with it internally, to talk to someone. And I think that, it's important that we understand that there are stages to grief. You don't just get over grief, it doesn't just go away on its own. You know, you may think that you're over it, but even, myself, I still find myself grieving at the loss of my grandmother. And it's been 12, 13 years, and I'm just now learning how to process it. Can you talk a
Right.
little bit about that?
Well, I do think, there's definitely stages, and there's, from a clinical lens, there's some very formal stages that I don't know that is necessarily helpful to talk about to the layperson. But in general, we all go through stages, and for us, will that those stages impact us in different ways. And so, yeah, there are times like now where I wish I could talk to my mother, my grandmother, my aunt. Those are people who were very, very key. And in the beginning, when it first happened, those things might have been more intense. Those emotions or those feelings might have been more intense. I think, looking at that's why the funeral and ways in which we express it, ways in which we connect with others around that, and we have a way in which we are expressing that and processing that grief is so important. I also want to say that, um, I think one of the things we really want to focus on is people who may be struggling with grief, because grief is natural. I mean, of course, if you lose
Right.
a loved one, it may be painful and emotionally challenging, but if it becomes so intense where it disrupts your ability to function, where it disrupts your ability to maintain your normal daily activities, like if you see a decrease in your appetite, if you see an increase in your appetite, or sleeping patterns, those kinds of things, those are things we really want to pay attention to, because when you talk about processing and being able to move through those stages, that's going to be the things that can create or manifest into very harmful ripples later in our lives, because it can take a toll emotionally as well as physically.
Thank you for that. And I believe we are just about done. So before we wrap up, I want to give you ladies any closing remarks you'd like to have.
I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to join your platform, the conversation. I hope that something that I said, benefited someone out there, that has family and that especially their loved ones, which are the elderly. So thank you again.
I guess I would just say that, in these times that, we're struggling with, that we just truly need to hold on to our hope. And if we can take hold of what we have control of, we can be able to navigate this time much more successfully, and we're going to come out stronger. Even when you look at the word hope, you can see healing and optimism and perseverance, and knowing that we have, certainly as people of God, our capacity to look towards eternity, that we have an eternal life, even
Right.
when we're moving beyond this moment. And so it's only a moment in time. And even if it goes on for a while, there's always hope. There's always going to be a shift, and the season is going to change. And so let's hold on to hope.
Thank you.
Yes.
And let me say before we conclude, I do want to give honor and thanks to our pastor, Bishop Jesse and Gavin, for allowing us to have these type of conversations. And so, Bishop, if you're watching, we thank you, sir, for the opportunity and the platform. And thank you all for joining us this week, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.